The snow fell slowly, covering the front porch like a white blanket, but the cold I felt came from elsewhere. I knocked on the door for the third time, louder this time, my hand shaking, but not just from the winter. Inside, the lights twinkled, laughter echoed muffled. It was Christmas Eve, and for some reason I couldn't understand. My family had locked the door and left me outside. Nothing made sense, not even the silence coming from inside the house that had once welcomed me. I stepped back a little, looking out the living room window. I saw my younger sister running past, wearing a red hat and a smile on her face. Were they pretending I didn't exist? I took a deep breath, trying to think of something that could justify this. A prank? A surprise? But something in the air told me it wasn't a joke. I knocked again, this time angrily, and heard a footstep on the other side. Someone stopped in front of the door and left without opening it. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical. A punch straight to the chest. Share this story to reach further. Subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. The street was deserted. Only the light from the street lamps and the distant sound of a Christmas carol coming from another house filled the void. My gloves were wet with melting snow, my fingers starting to tingle. I looked back, trying to remember if I had done something, said something, to justify this. But all that came to mind was my mother's smiling face at breakfast, just hours before. It didn't add up. They were all inside, celebrating, without me, and worse, ignoring me as if I were invisible. I sat on the snow-covered steps, my backpack still slung over my shoulder. I had just returned from university, 3 months away from home. I texted my dad, then my sister. Nothing. No response. Time passed slowly, as if punishing me. I felt frozen inside, not just by the weather, but by the feeling of being rejected. That night was supposed to be about togetherness, but I was alone, locked out of my own family. Every minute out there filled me with doubt. Had I been forgotten? Had something serious happened? Or was it intentional? I began mentally reviewing everything that could have caused this. A mistake, a fight I couldn't remember, or maybe something I'd never understood. But what frightened me most wasn't the abandonment. It was the silence of those who pretend you don't exist, and the certainty that, in that moment, something inside me was being broken. My whole body trembled as I decided to walk to the end of the street. Each step in the snow felt like a goodbye. I looked at the illuminated houses, full of voices and music, and wondered why, of all people, my own had decided to erase me from that night. I passed a window where a family was toasting, and it hurt like a knife. All I wanted was to understand, not to have been left like a stranger. But in that moment, I was just a homeless figure on Christmas Eve. I reached the corner, leaned against a tree, and let the tears fall, not out of weakness, but out of a despair I'd never felt before. It was as if the ground had disappeared and I was in free fall. What do you do when your own family closes the door in your face? I looked up at the cloudy sky, searching for some answer in the stars, but all I found was the silence that had followed me since the moment I'd touched that doorknob and discovered I was no longer welcome. I tried calling my grandmother. She always listened to me, always said I was her favorite boy, but the call went straight to voicemail. I went to the post office, sat on a bench, and watched time pass like someone watching a sad movie. I didn't want to tell anyone what was happening. It was humiliating. Being excluded by those who should love you is the kind of pain that's not easily shared. But there, alone, I started thinking about things I never thought I would, including whether I still wanted to return to that house someday. I stayed there until almost midnight, until the cold became so unbearable that I had to seek shelter. A friend from school lived 2 blocks away, and I decided to take a chance. He greeted me with surprise, welcoming me with a blanket and a mug of hot tea. He didn't ask any questions, just let me stay, and I thanked him. Sometimes the true spirit of Christmas doesn't come from where you expect it. His house was simple, but the warmth there was real. Something my own home had decided to deny me without warning, without reason, without mercy. That night, lying on his couch, I repeated the same question 1,000 times in my head. Why? Why did my family lock me out on Christmas? And why didn't anyone want to explain? I couldn't sleep well, and I swore, right then and there, that I wouldn't rest until I found out. I needed to understand, because only the truth could unfreeze that hole that had opened up inside me. But what I didn't know was that this truth would only come another Christmas. I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting from my friend's kitchen. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, but then I remembered my phone had no calls, no messages, no explanations, and my chest tightened again. I grabbed my backpack, thanked them for their hospitality, and returned to the street. My house was still there, intact. The Christmas lights still twinkled on the porch, as if nothing had happened, but I knew everything had changed. I stopped on the other side of the street and watched. I saw my father go out to take out the trash. He looked around, not seeing me, as if I didn't exist. It was like being slapped. A man who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up with me studying math, was now pretending I was invisible. That hurt me more than any harsh words. I decided I wouldn't lower myself. I turned my back, walked with firm steps, but inside I was silently crumbling. I spent the next few days at friends' houses, trying not to drown in what I was feeling. Christmas passed, the new year turned, and still nothing. No calls, no attempts to contact me. My entire life up until that point seemed like an illusion, as if the love I thought existed had vanished like smoke. It was strange how silence could hurt more than a scream. Their silence wasn't just absence, it was raw rejection, and I was swallowing it alone. I returned to university right after New Year's and tried to move on with my life, but inside me, an open wound throbbed every day. They asked me about my Christmas, and I laughed and made up stories. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth. Who would believe your own family locked you out? I felt ashamed, broken, but also revolted. With each night without an answer, my heart hardened a little more. The pain turned to anger, and the anger, a shield. I started writing everything down in a notebook. Every memory, every detail of that night, every question that haunted me. It was the only way to keep from going crazy. I withdrew from everyone. I became more withdrawn, more skeptical. I no longer trusted anyone. And every time I saw a Christmas decoration or heard a Christmas song, it was like a knife being twisted inside my chest. I tried to move on, but a part of me had frozen on that porch, that night, without knowing why. The only certainty I had was this. One day, they would have to explain it to me. I couldn't accept being erased like that, as if I didn't matter, as if I wasn't part of that family's history. I wouldn't chase, I wouldn't beg, but I wouldn't forget either. And even if it took years, I would find out, because the pain of not knowing was worse than any truth. And if I ever got an answer, it would have to come from them, in their time. But I would be waiting. The years passed faster than I imagined. I graduated, got a job in another city, rented my own apartment. On the outside, everything seemed under control. But inside, I carried a scar no one saw. I didn't come home the following Christmases. Not once. I always made up an excuse. But the truth was simple. I didn't want to risk being locked out again. That image haunted me. Even in my dreams, I made new friends, developed relationships, traveled, and yet, on the quietest days, the memory of that night still clung to me. It was like a movie that wouldn't leave my head. Sometimes I even wondered if I'd overreacted, if perhaps I'd misinterpreted everything. But all I had to do was remember my father's look, pretending I wasn't there, and I understood. It wasn't my imagination. I was excluded, and no one ever had the courage to tell me why. I tried to protect myself from this by distancing myself from everyone. Over time, even my tone of voice changed. I became more serious, more reserved, always alert. I built an invisible wall around myself, not letting anyone get too close. It was easier that way. It didn't hurt as much. But sometimes, on the coldest days of December, I felt like getting in the car and driving to that house, ringing the doorbell, looking them in the eye. I asked, "Why did you do that to me?" But I always gave up, because deep down, I was afraid of the answer, afraid of discovering something that could destroy me forever, and even more so, afraid of hearing that I never mattered as much as I thought I did. So I pretended I didn't care. I threw away the decorations. He said he hated Christmas, and everyone thought it was just a personality trait. No one knew that. In reality, I was just a boy frozen in time, someone who was left behind on one of the most important nights of my life. Time taught me to pretend well, but the absence of an apology, a nod, anything at all, it was like a constant reminder. They went on with their lives as if nothing had happened. I saw photos on social media, birthdays, meetings, trips, and my name was never mentioned again. It was as if I'd been erased from the family's memory, but if they thought I'd forgotten, they were wrong, because I was waiting for the day the reason would appear, and when it did, it was the following Christmas. That December, 4 years later, I received a white envelope in my mother's handwriting. There was no return address, just my name, written with a delicacy that nearly broke me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a letter, short, to the point, with a few words that would change everything, words that would shed light on what happened that night, but also words that would open a new wound, perhaps even deeper than the first. I held that letter for long minutes, not daring to read it. The envelope was still on the table, and my hands were sweating, as if they were about to touch something sacred or cursed. The simple fact that my mother had written to me, after 4 years of absolute silence, was already an explosion inside me. What if this was an attempt at reconciliation? What if it was just another way to hurt me? I took a deep breath, my heart racing like never before. I opened the envelope slowly, as if it might explode. The paper smelled like the house I grew up in, lavender and old wood. The text didn't begin with "Dear son" or "I'm sorry." It was direct. "You deserve to know." Those 3 words stuck in my throat like a lump. What did I deserve to know? Why only now? The handwriting was hers, but the message felt cold. I kept reading, my eyes burning and my soul on edge. She talked about the Christmas I was locked out. She said that night had been planned, that everyone in the family was aware, that it wasn't a mistake, that it was a decision. My hands were shaking. I read it and couldn't believe it. Each line seemed to rip apart a piece of my story. She said they needed to keep me away, for the greater good, but she didn't explain what that meant. Anger rose like wildfire. "What do you mean, planned?" She ended the letter by saying that year, I was finally ready to hear the rest. That if I wanted to know the whole truth, I should go to my grandmother's house on December 24th at 8 p.m., alone, and that there, everything would be revealed. The letter ended with, "Love, your mother." A love that, for years, I doubted still existed. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This couldn't be real. I didn't know if I was about to find answers again, or ghosts. I spent the next few days torn between going and not going. Part of me wanted to throw that letter away, pretend it never arrived. But another part, the most wounded, wanted answers, wanted blood. I needed to understand. I needed to look into the eyes of whoever did this to me. And maybe, deep down, I still wanted to believe there was some explanation that justified everything, that I wasn't just discarded, that there was a real reason, even if it hurt. On the 24th at 7:45 p.m., I parked my car in front of my grandmother's house. Everything was the same, as if time had stopped. The Christmas lights twinkled, but the silence was deafening. I got out of the car with my stomach churning, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the door, it opened before I could knock. My grandmother stared at me with teary eyes. "You came." That was it. No hug, no explanation. But in that moment, I knew the truth was about to be told. My grandmother's living room was dark except for the Christmas tree lights. The smell of baking pie wafted through the air, but there was no sign of a celebration. It was as if time had stood still. My grandmother guided me to the couch without a word. I sat with my heart racing, the sound of the clock on the wall ticking away like a countdown. Then slowly, they began to enter. One by one, my father entered first. His hair was graying, his eyes weary. Behind him, my mother, silent, her eyes fixed on mine. Then came my uncles, my cousins, even my younger sister, all sitting in a circle, as if in an intervention. But no one spoke. The air was so thick it felt like it would explode. I stared at each face, searching for a spark of regret, but saw only tension. My grandmother cleared her throat and broke the silence. "It's time to tell." She began to speak, her voice breaking. She told me that years before, something very serious had happened in the family. Something that involved a denunciation, a buried secret, and an attempt to protect someone. I still didn't understand how this involved me, until she said, "Back then, we thought you knew too much, that you might expose something unintentionally, and to protect the family, we made a cowardly decision." My eyes filled with tears. Had they locked me out? To silence something? My mother interrupted and said that in fact, there was someone in the family who could be arrested. Someone very close, and that they believed I could, even unintentionally, ruin everything. "You were too fair, too honest, and we didn't know how to deal with it," she said. It was a punch in the gut. Was I punished for being good? For not going along with lies? Was I excluded to cover up a mistake I didn't even make? I felt betrayed again, but this time, clearly. My father tried to justify himself, saying it was a desperate decision. that they thought they'd call me back that very night, after sorting everything out. But when they saw me leaving, they didn't know what to do, and they decided to wait. Wait too long, for years. Every word they said was a knife twisting in the open wound. There wasn't enough regret in the world to erase what they did to me. But now, I finally understand. The room fell silent. I didn't cry. I just looked at each of them, one by one, like someone looking at a stranger. The truth was there. Raw, dirty, but real. And as much as it hurt, it was better than the emptiness before. I stood up slowly. I thanked them for telling me, and walked to the door. Behind me, the sound of sighs, perhaps of relief, perhaps of shame. But in that moment, I didn't want forgiveness. I just wanted to move on. Because knowing the truth, even if it was bitter, was the first step to leaving everything behind. I left that house feeling like something had died inside me. The revelation gave me the answers I wanted, but not the relief I'd hoped for. I walked to the car feeling a weight on my back, as if I were carrying all those years of silence in invisible bags. The snow was falling again, just like that night. Only now, I knew, they'd pushed me away, for fear of what I might reveal, for fear of me. The drive home was one of the quietest trips of my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry. I just sat in silence, swallowing every word I heard in that room. I replayed their faces in my mind, and I didn't miss them. Just tiredness. It wasn't pain anymore. It was exhaustion. The emotional exhaustion of someone who had struggled for years to understand an abandonment. That should never have happened. But now I was free of it. When I got home, I dropped the key on the floor and sat in the dark living room. I didn't know whether to scream, sleep, or write it all down on paper. I ended up staying there, quiet, feeling like I had finally come full circle. Christmas no longer scared me, because now, the ghost that haunted me had a name, a face, and a reason. And even if it was cruel, at least it was concrete. And that, in a way, freed me. I thought about responding to my mother's letter, but I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe never. I needed space. They had 4 years to talk to me, and they chose silence. Now, it was my turn to choose silence. Not for revenge, but for protection. I needed to rebuild what was left of me, not with them, but with myself. And for the first time, I felt it was possible. The following week, I threw away the old Christmas cards, the childhood photos with them, everything that kept me trapped in the past. I kept only one thing, the notebook where I wrote everything down. It was my living reminder that I survived, and that no one, not even those who raised you, has the right to erase your existence. That was my personal manifesto, my truth, and it would never be silenced by anyone again. I closed the year silently, but at peace. There were no more unanswered questions, and even though there was no reconciliation, there was clarity. And sometimes, that's all we need to move on. I didn't know if I would ever see that family again, but in that moment, it was no longer necessary, because I had finally found myself, and nothing they could do could take that away. Months passed since that night. Life went on, as it always does. I returned to work, to my commitments, to the small routines that make the world go round. On the outside, no one could imagine what I had been through. Inside, I was still rebuilding. The pain hadn't completely disappeared, but it had changed form. It was no longer a pent-up scream. It was a scar, visible only to me. Some nights were still difficult. I still dreamed of that door closing, still woke with the sound of the doorknob jamming echoing in my head. But now I could breathe afterward. I could get up, drink a glass of water, and tell myself, "You've been through this, and you survived." This awareness gave me strength. The wound was there, but it no longer defined me. I started looking at people differently. I started appreciating those who choose to stay, those who listen, those who care for no reason. I made new friendships, based on truth. And I discovered that family isn't always about those who share your blood. Sometimes, it's about those who see you, listen to you, and respect you. I learned this the hard way, but I learned it, and I'll never give it up again. My mother's letter was kept in a locked drawer. I never showed it to anyone, because deep down, that pain was mine alone, and I preferred it that way. Not out of shame, but because it was part of my path, a path I walked alone, full of potholes, but which made me strong enough not to repeat to anyone what they did to me, strong enough to be different. The following year, I was invited to spend Christmas with a friend's family, and I accepted. For the first time in years, I wore a red sweater, helped put up the tree, and genuinely laughed. No one there knew my full story, but they knew I was there, and that was more than I could ask for. It was then that I realized life can still be beautiful, even after trauma. And when midnight came, I stepped out onto the balcony, looked up at the sky, and smiled. Not for them, but for myself, because I did it. I survived the abandonment, the silence, the doubt, and I came back stronger. Not as the son they locked away, but as the man who learned never again to beg for love where there is no respect. And that, for me, was the greatest gift of all. The following Christmas arrived without warning. A whole year had passed, and for the first time, it didn't hurt so much. I didn't prepare anything special. I just bought a small tree and placed it in the corner of the living room, not to honor the past, but to mark a new beginning, a Christmas all my own. I received messages from friends, co-workers, people I wasn't even that close to. None of them were family, and it no longer hurt me. It just showed me who still saw me, and who never wanted to see me. It was liberating, knowing I could exist without asking permission. The day before, I volunteered at an orphanage. I delivered gifts and played with children who, like me, also knew absence. I saw something in their eyes that mirrored my own, the pain of not being chosen, but also the strength to carry on. Even so, it was there that I felt Christmas return. I returned home feeling light. Loneliness no longer frightened me, because it was no longer a lack, it was a choice. I chose to be with myself. I chose to no longer accept closed doors. That changed everything. For the first time, I understood that I no longer needed explanations. I just needed peace. I looked at the tree and left a letter under it, not for my family, but for myself. I wrote, "You've been through the worst, and you're still here, with your heart intact, and your head held high." I kept that letter in my memory. It was my own gift, my own recognition. Pain became history, and history became strength. I haven't forgotten what they did, but I've learned not to live with anger, because that would be like locking the door from the inside, and I chose to open it, but only for those who deserve to enter. Never again out of obligation. Never again for blood. 2 days after Christmas, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered on impulse. It was my sister. Her voice was shaky. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She hesitated before continuing. She said she wanted to see me, that she missed me. I was silent. Time seemed frozen. This was the first time anyone in the family had broken the wall. But my mind raced. Why now? What did she want? Part of me wanted to shut down. Another part wanted to listen. So I asked, why? She said she couldn't take the silence anymore, that the weight of what they did to me haunted her every day. And that Christmas, she cried alone, remembering the porch. Her voice cracked. But it wasn't drama. It was truth. I would recognize that tone anywhere. I responded calmly. I said I didn't hate anyone, but I needed time. A lot of time. She understood. She cried more, and asked that, if I ever accepted, I would come and meet her. Just the two of us, without anyone else. She said she wanted to apologize, looking me in the eyes. I hung up with my heart racing. I didn't know if this was the beginning of something, or just another wound. But this time, I was in control. The door was in my hand. I chose who knocked, and who came in. And that gave me a kind of peace I'd never felt before. Maybe one day I'll accept, maybe not. But the simple fact that she called already showed that the silence was no longer absolute. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough for now. Because I've learned to walk alone, and now no one can erase me anymore. I know 1,000 times how to send a message, ask how she was, but I stopped. Because forgiveness isn't a rush, it's a process, and I was still living mine. Going back to the past without being ready is like reopening a barely healed wound. I didn't want to do that, not now, but I also couldn't ignore the courage she'd shown, that she'd faced her family's silence to reach me, and that said a lot. I grabbed my notebook and wrote a letter. I didn't send it, I just wrote. In it, I told everything I felt that night. I told how much it hurt, how much it destroyed me, but I also told how I rebuilt myself, how I learned to stand up even when no one was around. Writing helped me understand one thing. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to no longer carry the burden of others. I wouldn't forget what they did, but I wouldn't let it define me. Because today, I knew who I was, and I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. That night, before going to sleep, I put the letter in my notebook and said softly, "I forgive you." not to them, but to myself. Because carrying resentment is tiring, and I didn't want to live tired anymore. I wanted lightness. I wanted new beginnings, even small ones. The pain didn't disappear, but it lessened. Because forgiveness, even silent, soothes. And even if my sister never reads that letter, writing it was already a step for me. And maybe, in a while, I can take the next one, when my heart tells me to. On New Year's morning, I woke up to a notification. It was a message from my mom. Simple, direct. Happy New Year, son. I'm thinking of you. I stood there staring at the screen. It had been years without a word. And now, there, just one sentence. I didn't respond right away. My chest tightened. Because only those who have experienced abandonment know how much more a message can hurt than silence. Was it too late? Or was it the beginning of something? I didn't know. I only knew that that sentence had torn me apart inside. I spent the day trying to understand what I was feeling. Anger? Relief? Sadness? None of them felt right. It was like I was standing before a door ajar, and I held the key to decide whether to enter, or leave it as it was. For the first time, I was in control. That night, I wrote a short reply. Thank you. Happy New Year too. That was it. I didn't have the strength to do anything else, but I also didn't want to ignore it, because ignoring it would be like doing what they did to me. And I promised myself, I will never do to anyone what they did to me. After sending it, I took a deep breath. It felt strange, but light. Maybe the story won't have a perfect ending. Maybe it will never be the same again. But that doesn't matter. I'm a different person now. And whoever wants to go back will have to come with the truth. I put away my phone, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to smile. Not because everything was resolved, but because, for the first time, I felt everything was in its right place, the way it was meant to be. No weight, no pain, just me, whole, strong, and at peace. Some pains don't go away. They just settle in a corner of the soul. I learned to live with the absence, with the void left by family. It didn't hurt like it used to, but it was still there, like an old scar. I saw my sister post a childhood photo of us on social media. No caption, just the image. It touched me. I didn't get in touch, but I kept the gesture. Small bridges are built this way, without noise, just intention. My mom sent another message on my birthday. I've been thinking about you all day. That was it. And this time, I didn't reply. Not out of resentment, but because I've learned, not every contact needs a response. Sometimes just observing is enough. I still think about them. I still remember Christmases of old, smiles that now seem like lies, but I no longer want answers. I no longer seek explanations. The truth has been told, and now, the ones who have to live with it are them. Of everything I lost, what hurt the most was trust. And of everything I gained, what mattered most was my own voice. No one can silence what I've experienced, and no one will decide for me what I deserve to feel. Today, I look ahead, and I see a clear path, mine alone. No ties, no dependencies. I don't need to go back, because where I am now is already home. And where there is peace, there is family, even if it doesn't share my name. I returned one last time to the house where I grew up. I was passing through town and stopped in front of it, unplanned. The porch was the same door, the same doorknob, everything frozen in time. Only I had changed. I didn't knock. I just stood there staring. For a few seconds, I considered going in, but there was no need. I had already closed that chapter. The answer wasn't there. It was within me, and that was enough. I remembered the night I was locked out, and I smiled. Because now I knew I was rejected for being true, and yet I continued to be true. They lost someone who never lied about how he felt. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I just followed. Because now I knew that a real family doesn't close doors. It doesn't leave you in the cold. It doesn't silence you. Those who love, welcome. Those who love, wait. Those who love, explain. And when that doesn't happen, you learn to love on your own. And that, for me, was the greatest victory. The key that set me free, the door I opened myself, to never again depend on anyone else. As if this story touched you, share it with someone. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear it. Thank you for staying until the end. This story is ours now.